I decided to make the 3-hour trip to see my wife. She had gone to her sister's house on Monday, and now it was Thursday. She called me on Wednesday and told me that she would not be home on Thursday as planned. Her niece was sick and she was helping her sister take care of her. I thought it would be a nice surprise if I showed up Thursday night. I made arrangements to have Friday off. I would have a long weekend to spend with Betty. I never liked being around my wife's family, although I got along quite well with them. It just seemed like Betty usually came to visit without me. My brother-in-law Bill and Betty's sister Rachel had 3 children, and apparently one of them was ill. I decided to rent a room at a local motel so that Betty and I could have some privacy and not crowd her sister's family in their modest home. I checked into the room and laid out my few clothes. I looked around the room, wondering how Betty would like it. I figured it was clean enough and she would be pleasantly surprised at my thoughtfulness. I'd been neglecting her a little lately, and when she'd gone to Rachel's, I'd started to miss her. I decided to be a more considerate husband and drive up to surprise her. I was admiring the beautiful view of the parking lot when a familiar car stopped right in front of my window, not 3 spaces away from where I parked. I thought it was Betty's car until I saw a tall man getting out from behind the wheel. All cars seem the same to me now. The days of unique muscle cars are over. All cars look alike. Then I saw Betty getting out of the passenger side. She laughed as she walked around the car, about 8 feet from where I was standing at the window, and hugged a man. He put his hand on her shoulder and hugged her as they waltzed to the door of the room next to mine. He pulled out the key and opened it. He then led my wife inside. I was sweating as I finally stepped away from the window and sat on the bed. Could I have seen what I thought I saw? I decided I was wrong. It had to be someone else. It occurred to me that I could easily tell if my eyes had deceived me. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Betty's program number. As I did so, I pressed my ear against the wall. I heard the phone ring in the next room. It was muffled, but I heard it. I heard some kind of conversation that sounded more like a low hum. The words were unintelligible. "Hello, this is Betty," my wife answered. I pulled myself together and asked, "How are you, Betty? This is your husband, Ken." "I know who my husband is, silly. Has anything happened, Ken?" asked Betty. "Not really, dear. I just missed you and wanted to see what you were doing tonight," I replied. "How is Sarah feeling?" "She's still sick. I'm helping Rachel so she can get some rest. I think she'll be better soon," Betty replied. "That's too bad. Could you get Rachel and I'll just tell her I'm thinking about Sarah? I feel sorry for her," I suggested. "Rachel's taking a nap right now. She didn't get much sleep last night. But I'll tell her what you said. That was very thoughtful," Betty told me. "I need to go check on Sarah. I'll call you later, Ken." "Okay, Betty. I love you and bye," muttered I. The phone went silent. I heard some words and laughter from the next room. I was beyond angry. I saw headlines in the local paper about a woman being beaten to death with a Gideon's Bible by her enraged husband. It would give me a few minutes of pleasure, but the rest of my life would be miserable. I really don't like the thought of being Bubba's bitch. I ruled out murder, but only after careful thought. It was too quick and painless. I had to think of something better. Evidence was always good, no matter what course of action I chose. I'll work on it. I went out to the car to grab my digital camera. I was being very cautious because I knew they could see me as easily as I could see them. A direct approach is always better, so I snuck over to their window. The curtain was carelessly pulled back and I had a few inches of unobstructed view. My 22-year-old wife was sleeping with a stranger. He was smiling and looking Betty up and down while she worked some real magic. I have heard of husbands getting incredible erections seeing their wives having sex. That might work for some guys, but my rage didn't allow for any carnal desires. I stood at the window for 20 minutes taking some very good pictures. She was definitely having a blast with this guy. He had her in almost every way except free. I got tired before they did and went back to my room. I packed up all my stuff and quietly loaded it into the car. When I went to pay for my room, I was visited by inspiration. I thought I saw my old college friend Tom Jenkins in room 108, I said to the girl behind the counter. I wanted to say hello if it was really him, but if it wasn't, I'm going to look like a fool. "Could you tell me if this is really my old buddy Tom?" I asked. The girl put aside her novel and looked at the monitor. I'm sorry, she began. This is Jeff Wilson from Alden. Geez, good thing I asked first, I told her, getting ready to leave. I just drove for a while, and then I decided to take the bull by the horns. I pulled up to Rachel's house and walked up to the door. I rang the bell and she answered. I watched her reaction, but other than obvious surprise, she seemed unconcerned about anything. I figured she had no idea what her older sister was doing at that moment. Ken, what a surprise, Rachel greeted. Betty went home a few hours ago. I thought you knew she was going to come home tonight. I had some things to do in the neighborhood, so I thought I'd stop by and see her, I lied. How's Sarah? I saw her playing a computer game with her brother while I asked. Sarah? Rachel asked. She's fine, although she caught a cold when Betty first got here. At least she got over it in a day. Bill came from the TV room, shook my hand, and offered me a beer. I was going to decline, but somehow I felt closer to Betty's family than I ever had before. That would be great, Bill, I agreed. I can only stay a few minutes. A beer would be good right now. We sat and chatted for a few minutes. Rachel had put the kids to bed, and I realized I had to head home soon. Just then, I noticed a cell phone by the couch. It had a speakerphone. An idea popped into my head. Would you mind if I called Betty from your cell phone? I asked. My cell phone keeps bugging me. Rachel was just getting back and handed me the phone. I dialed Betty's number, hung up, and put it on speaker. Hello, this is Betty, my wife answered. I hoped she would be too full of lust to notice that I sounded like I was in a tunnel or something. Hello again. I hope you're not too busy, Betty. I just felt like talking, I replied. Well, I'm trying to chill Sarah, she puffed. I've been running around getting soup and drinks for her. Betty sounded like she was exhausted, and I knew why. They must have had sex for over an hour and a half. Rachel frowned and looked at Bill, and then at me. So, she's still pretty sick then? I asked. Is Bill or Rachel there to help? No, Rachel is still asleep and Bill went to fill a prescription. I really can't talk right now, Betty insisted. I'll call you later. With that, the phone disconnected. What the hell was Betty talking about? Rachel asked. It doesn't make any sense at all. Do you think she's been drinking? Bill was a pretty perceptive guy and didn't offer an opinion. He just looked at me to see my reaction. He realized I was on to something. I'll have to ask her when I see her, I smiled. She was probably asleep and not fully awake. With those words, I said goodbye and got in my car to head home. Betty never called me back. I got home around midnight and went to bed. Sleep didn't come for a long time. My mind was spinning with thoughts of what I should do in this situation. I never believed I would have to face this. We all talk about what we would do if, but it's a different thing when it actually happens. The next morning, I got up early and decided to upload the pictures I had taken. The lighting wasn't the best, but it was very easy to determine who was pictured and what they were doing. The pictures only strengthened my resolve to get revenge. I just had no idea how to do it. I entered Jeff Wilson's name into several search engines. Wilson is not an uncommon last name. I found several Jeff Wilsons, and 2 of them were located in Alden. I called the first number and asked the woman who answered if I could speak to Mr. Jeff Wilson. She said I needed her son since her husband had died a few years ago. I thanked her and hung up. I looked up information on Alden and found Jeff Wilson's name several times. He seemed to be a force to be reckoned with in his small town. He owned a construction company and served on the hospital board of directors. He was involved in several fundraising groups. This guy was a regular saint, except he was married and involved with my wife. On a hunch, I dug out Betty's old yearbooks and looked through them. Sure enough, there was Jeff Wilson, who went to school 2 years ahead of her. He had written something under his picture, but it was scrawled in such a way that it was impossible to read. I sat back and considered the situation. I felt much better than I had last night, and I realized that the world wasn't going to end. I always thought I loved my wife, and she loved me, but I guess I was wrong. One thing I knew for sure, I decided. I would make one hell of a detective. With a few questions and a computer, I easily gathered all the information I needed. The phone rang, and when I answered it, a voice asked for Betty. I almost gave her motel number, but then decided that would give me away. It did give me an idea, though. I always carry a phone card with me in case I find myself away from home and my cell phone doesn't work. The nice thing about them is that the caller ID doesn't detect the actual number of the caller. I've used it to call a few random companies in a few cities and tell them a phrase about buying whatever product they sell. I then told them I had to go, but to call back after lunch and ask for Betty. I then gave them her motel number and room number. Just as I finished calling, my cell phone rang. I reluctantly answered it. "Honey, how are you this morning? I have time to talk today," Betty continued. "Rachel is looking after Sarah right now, and I managed to take a nap." "You're just a wonderful sister," I replied. I wondered if I sounded sarcastic. "How did you sleep?" "Well, it was a long night and I didn't get much sleep," Betty replied. I figured she must have been awake with Jeffy boy spanking her all night. Then she continued. "I was wondering if you wouldn't mind if I stayed a few more days to help Rachel. She's already exhausted." "I think you're already exhausted yourself," I snapped back. "She's not exhausted yet. You'll stay here as long as you want. Take a year or two if it'll do you any good, Betty. Just remember to have a good time. I'll understand if you don't come back at all." I hung up the phone then. I didn't feel like saying anything more. It would only make things worse. I thought I could handle it, but she was treating me like I was a fucking moron. It was very painful. Sure, she could sleep with some guy, but no need to treat me like the village idiot. The phone rang again, but I let it ring. After a few minutes, I checked the message. "You're so selfish, Ken. I'm trying to help my sister, and all you think about is yourself. I'm going to stay for a few days, and I expect you to call and apologize. Call my cell phone. If you use Rachel's cell phone, you'll disturb poor little Sarah," she concluded. I was furious. This pathetic cunt was having fun with some old boyfriend and trying to make me feel guilty for being upset. I wish I had balls like that. I called a friend and went golfing to clear my head. I got back around 6 and checked for messages. There were none. I sat down at the computer and tried to create chaos. I found Jeff's construction company and he had a web page. I had already saved pages of his many civic accomplishments. Jeff had a rather attractive family. His wife looked like a slender blonde and their 2 children were high schoolers. He should have thought about them a little more. I set up a Hotmail account and sent pictures of Jeff getting sex from Betty. He had an email address on his web page, so I sent the pictures there. I didn't bother to show Betty's face in the pictures. I figured it wasn't worth playing all my cards, and there might be a time in the future when I would regret putting erotic photos of my wife or ex-wife online. I wondered how Betty liked getting phone calls to her little love nest. She had to wonder why anyone would call her there. As far as she knew, no one even knew she was at the motel. It must have been unsettling. I supposed having an affair with a man is hard on the nerves. I received a short note in my inbox. It was from Jeff's email address. It said the following. "When did you get the pictures? Where? Who are you? What do you want?" There was no signature, so I didn't know if it was Jeff, a coworker, or his wife. I wrote back, "Call Jeff and ask him these questions." Then I wrote the motel number and his room number. It was already 8 o'clock. I went to bed at 10. In a small motel a few hours away, shit must have been blowing through the fan at record speed and volume. Sleep seemed like a much easier prey. I smiled to myself as I dozed off. My last thoughts were that it was almost exactly 3 hours to Betty. It was possible that at 8 o'clock some flying crap was bearing down on her. I felt something stir and slowly woke up. Betty was sitting up in bed. I looked at the clock and saw that it was 11:20. I smiled to myself and went back to sleep. When I woke up, Betty was gone. I could hear her downstairs in the kitchen. I wondered how she had slept. I showered, shaved, and got dressed. I felt pretty good, but kind of shitty. I knew I was an asshole, but I wasn't the one making the rules. I was just playing the game that Betty and Jeff had started. I walked into the kitchen and Betty smiled broadly at me. She looked terrible. She had bags under her eyes that looked like tea bags. Her hair wasn't styled into a neat style, and she looked stressed. "I came home last night, Ken. Sarah was feeling better, and you were upset that I was gone so long, so I decided to come back as soon as I could," she lied. I stared at her for a minute. She didn't know how much I knew, and it excited her. I was enjoying it, but it couldn't last long enough to satisfy me. I decided I would put off talking to the lawyer as long as I could torture Betty. "You look just awful," I remarked. "I don't think you got much sleep at Rachel's. You'll be in worse shape than Sarah." "Would you like some breakfast?" "I'll rest after I make something for you," Betty replied. I could see her strategy. She was going to try to be nice to me and hope it would all work out. That gambit wouldn't work this time, but she had no idea what she was up against. I just nodded and sat down. While I ate, she tried to make small talk, but I was of little use. All I could do was not grab her by the throat and strangle her. I kept telling myself that I shouldn't be too hostile or she would realize I was in on it. I had to act a little polite. I ate and left to mow the yard and do all the little things husbands have to do to keep their faithful wives happy with them while hoping for a piece of ass. Betty was already resting when I came back into the house. I grabbed my clubs and headed out to play golf. I got home around 7 o'clock. I played some golf and had a few drinks. I was surprisingly happy. I spent part of the day trying to sort through my emotions. Why did I feel so good when I knew my wife was sleeping with another man? It finally came to me. I wasn't worried about what time I would get home or whether Betty would be upset about a million things. I realized that I didn't really care. I was free and could live my life. "I didn't know where you were, Ken. Finally, I saw that your golf clubs were gone and I realized you must be out golfing. It would have been nice if you had left a note of where you were," Betty admonished. I walked over to the refrigerator and grabbed a beer. "Are you going to cook dinner tonight, or are you going to stand there and bitch?" I asked. Betty gasped and turned white. Then she turned red and started yelling at me. "Do you expect me to cook dinner after the way you acted? Not until you sincerely apologize to me," Betty stated with all certainty. I looked at her and drank my beer. She was expecting me to apologize. In a lifetime, you have 1 or 2 moments of calm and clarity. For the most part, these moments are unattainable. I had that moment. Inner peace and joy overwhelmed my being. A week ago, I would have crawled on the floor and kissed Betty's feet, and then I'd be begging for forgiveness. I finished my beer, tossed the can in the trash, and headed out the door. I stopped at a small diner and had a nice steak with baked potatoes and some vegetables. I ate alone in silence and enjoyed every minute of it. This clarity gave me a pleasure I had been missing since puberty. It was awesome. When I got home, Betty was watching TV. She watched me go through the living room and didn't comment on anything. I went and got ready for bed. Then I went to the guest room and went to bed. For the second time that night, I felt Betty move into bed with me. I pretended to continue sleeping. She moved over to me, put her arms around me, and lay next to me. I felt myself falling asleep again. When I woke up, the sun was already streaming through the window. Betty was looking at me while I wiped the sleep from my eyes. "I was a little rushed yesterday, Ken. I should have made dinner for you, I know. I haven't made you dinner in a week. I was just tired and blamed it on you," she finished. It was the kind of apology Betty had never made in our entire marriage. I was a little surprised. I'd seen the movie War of the Roses with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner and had expected a scenario like that. Betty ran her hands over my breasts and started to romanticize a little. She smiled at me. "Does this little guy feel neglected?" asked Betty. "Doesn't he want me?" Betty knew I'd never turned down that offer in all the years of our marriage, though the offer itself sounded rarer and rarer. "The little guy would love to make slow, nice sex," I replied with a smile. "You'd think I'd told her I wanted to shit in her mouth." She became indignant and pounced on me again. "What do you want? I'm being nice to you here, and you do this. It'll be a cold day in hell before I ever take," she yelled. I still had pictures in front of my eyes of Betty doing it with Jeff. Now she was too good to do the same for her husband. I was furious. I rolled over on my side and pushed her hard. She flew off the bed and fell to the floor. She was stunned for a second, then sat up and looked at me in shock. "You jumped into bed with me. You asked if I was horny, and I told you what I wanted," I growled. "Stay out of my bed until you're ready." Betty stood up and tried to say something, but I interrupted her. "Now get out of here. You can make me breakfast or not. If nothing is cooked within half an hour, I'll eat elsewhere. It's up to you," I finished. Betty turned and walked out the door. I wondered if I'd gone a little overboard, but good thing I didn't care. I took a shower and got dressed. When I came down the stairs, breakfast was already cooking. I grinned to myself. I sat down at the table and Betty placed a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon in front of me. For a brief moment, I wished I had a taster. Then I greedily took to the food. I had a good appetite and felt great. Betty chickened out a bit, pouring more coffee. I started to think that I could put up with her sleeping with Jeff if I was going to be treated like that when she was with me, but I quickly dismissed that thought. After eating, I went to get the Sunday paper. When I returned, I read the paper. After lunch, I drank beer and watched 2 baseball games. Betty did the cleaning and other chores. She left me alone all afternoon. At 6 o'clock, dinner was on the table, and it was delicious. "Betty, that was delicious. You're probably the best cook I've ever seen," I said. "I mean it when I tell you that." Betty smiled at me. She seemed genuinely pleased by my compliment. "Thank you, Ken. I know your mom was a very good cook, so it means a lot to me. I haven't been keeping up with all my chores around the house lately. I've just been so worried about Sarah and everything else," she lied. I was starting to get annoyed with her lies. "Yeah, I'm sure you were pretty busy in Hanneltown," I replied. "Since you were able to nurse someone back to health, it must have been all worth it." I remembered Jeff kissing my wife's breasts like a newborn baby. It was another image I won't soon forget. Her attempts at martyrdom made me sick to my stomach. Leaving my desk, I went to my office and began the work I had neglected by taking Friday off. It seemed like such a long time ago. Working on books always makes me sleepy, so I got ready and went to bed in the guest room around 10:30. For the 3rd time that night, I felt Betty get under my covers. I just laid there. I didn't pretend to sleep. I just watched her. There was a faint light pouring in from the hallway, and I could see her clearly. Betty looked at me and saw that I was watching her. She started kissing my breasts. I just relaxed and enjoyed the sensations. She was very good, and I knew I wouldn't last long. We made love to her. Waking up for work, I looked around. Betty was nowhere to be seen. I showered and got ready for work. As I walked downstairs, I could smell breakfast cooking. Betty smiled as I entered the kitchen and placed a beautiful plate of breakfast in front of me. She hadn't gotten up to feed me in years. I looked at her with a question in my eyes. "I thought I was going to get up and make you breakfast until you made me do it," she laughed. "You must be hungry after last night," she added. "Thank you, Betty. I appreciate you doing this for me. You'll still make a good wife," I smiled. Betty stared at me for a second and then hurried out of the room. I guess I had struck a nerve. I realized that I had changed the nature of our relationship. There was anger and even revenge, but I couldn't escape the feeling that it was so much better than the way Betty and I used to live. She seemed to really enjoy having me controlling her. I was happy with her, except for her relationship with that bastard Jeff. Betty got home from work about a half hour before me. When I walked in the door, I could smell dinner cooking, and she was humming in the kitchen. This has always been an indicator to me of Betty's mood. When she hums, she's happy. We had just finished dinner when the phone rang. I was sitting in the living room when Betty answered it. It only took a few seconds to determine that it was Rachel calling on the other end. Betty then removed herself so she couldn't hear the conversation with her sister. It was quite some time before Betty returned to the living room. She looked like her dog had just died. I could see that she had been crying and seemed to be barely holding back her tears. "It was Rachel," she began. "She told me you stopped by on Thursday." I just sat there and waited. I wasn't going to make it easy for Betty. "She told me how you called me and asked about Sarah and that my statements to you were very strange," Betty admitted. "She said that you put you on speakerphone and she and Bill heard the entire conversation." I don't know what Betty expected or hoped for, but I just sat there and listened. Finally, she continued. "You knew I wasn't at Rachel's when I told you I had to stay late to help with Sarah," Betty reasoned. "You didn't tell me that you knew I was lying and that I had to go home." I sat there, watching her and waiting. She'd get to the point soon, or so I thought. "What do you know, Ken?" she asked. She was trembling a little now. "Why didn't you demand that I come home soon? Why didn't you tell me you knew I was lying?" "You're a smart girl, Betty," I replied. "You tell me what I know and why I didn't bother to tell you anything." You're the reason I got the call, aren't you? She demanded. It was because of you that everything happened. No, Betty, I told her. I'm not the cause. It's never a good idea to blame someone else when you're trapped in your own lies. Tell me what you know, she insisted. Why are you still trying to avoid the truth? I asked. Asked me. Are you still hoping it will go away on its own? Why not just admit why you told me those lies? Betty had always subscribed to the theory that the best defense is a good offense, and she tried this ploy in desperation. What nerve you've got! You've been acting strange to me, and you won't tell me why. Why can't you be man enough to tell me if something is bothering you instead of playing games? She yelled. I stood up and walked over to her, and she backed away fearfully. I walked past her and opened the drawer next to the computer. I rummaged through some old papers and pulled out a dozen or so of the best pictures I had taken. Holding them out to her, I walked back to my chair and sat down. I saw her go pale as she looked through the pictures. I don't know if she appreciated the quality of my work or how fantastic her ass and breasts looked in the pictures. The tears flowed non-stop, and she ran off to the bedroom. I went back to watching the game. After the game, I headed to bed. By this time, I was using the guest room as my own. I knew Betty was hurting, but that's the way it should be. It's worth thinking about shit like this ahead of time, isn't it? I don't know how long it was, but I woke up to a very pleasant sensation. Betty was kissing me. We made love again. It's going to be like this from now on, I declared. If you mess with me one more time, your ass will be on the street the minute after I find out about it, and you know I'm going to find out about it, I insisted. You got it all figured out? I asked. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then I want you to entertain me until I fall asleep, I demanded. Betty obediently complied with my wishes.